Alright, in this tutorial we are going to import the FBX we have created into our wheelchair simulation. In the Unity Hub under Installs we should find the version 2021.3.32F1 with the Android module active. If you don't see Android here, select the gear wheel, add modules, check everything Android and hit install. In my case that's grayed out because it's already installed. Then under projects, if you don't see the wheelchair simulation, go to Add, this little arrow down, Add project from disk. Then you navigate to the folder where you have downloaded and unpacked the Unity project that was provided on the class folder. When you see assets, libraries, etc., select Add project. This will then show you the project here in the project list, and you can simply click on it and Unity will load the project. So when the project is loaded, you should be in the basic space scene. If you don't see this basic space, you can go to scenes, double click on basic space, and you have that space. It's a good idea to right away save this as under scenes and give the scene a new name just to keep this basic scene always untouched for further exploration. I call this MG scene, but it can be anything. Okay, so now under assets here in the projects folder down below, we create with right click and create a new folder and call this models. And double click models, create 3 new folders. One is meshes. This would be the geometries we import. Another folder for materials. And another folder for the textures. And this keeps everything neat and tidy. When the projects grow and become more complex, we can easily find our content. Next, we must navigate to the folder where we stored the FBX. So I have it here, and what we do is we drag this model, the FBX, to the meshes. When we expand the meshes, we find the model, and in the inspector on the right we get a preview. Here we can already check if the geometry looks okay. It doesn't have the materials yet because we need to first extract the textures. So that's up here next to model rig animation. We select materials, extract textures, and then in our models folder we select the textures folder, select folder, the textures get extracted, and then we also extract the materials and put those under materials. We select that folder. So we would have then our materials, glass ramp gray, walls white, as we had them in Rhino, and the textures would then be this concrete texture we have used for the ramp. So that's all good. We can go to our models again and to the meshes and already drag the model into our hierarchy. So from the assets to the hierarchy, and it's going to appear. Can then check if it looks correct. So we also see that the insertion points where we have that handle is where we select the object origin. If you don't see this where you had set the origin, here under scene there is a selection of pivot and center. So center would move it to the center of the object, and pivot would move it to the point we have selected to export from. So here we see that this room is actually a little bit too small for this large model. So we can select this game object here called room and give it a scale in the X direction of 1.5 perhaps, and in the C also 1.5. So the room becomes larger. We can select the model we have imported and drag it around a little bit, see if it fits into the room. It is also possible to rotate it here simply in the inspector. We could, for instance, rotate it 45 degrees, drag it around some more. Another way to rotate it is with these gizmos here. So find a good place for the model. I would say something like this might work. And then we can also expand the Caviar model. We see that the objects are grouped into the layers we have created prior. So if, for instance, in this mesh class game object, which is here a layer which it was in Rhino, we find this glass object, and there, if we zoom in, we find that this object has a little bit of transparency. We can also make some material adjustments here to this glass material if we are not happy with that look, and that same thing is true for all the other sub-objects, bench, ramp, etc. So here, and that's important to remember, is a ramp, and that's a geometry where the wheelchair should ride on. So that ramp needs a setting, and that's up here when it's selected. So not mesh ramp, but ramp. The geometry itself. In the inspector, there is a layer tab, and you can expand this, and there is a layer called floor. So only objects on a layer called floor are those the wheelchair can ride on. Now, in order to detect the floor, we must also select this ramp and give it a component here in the inspector, and that is a mesh collider. So a mesh collider allows the simulation to detect essentially a collision, or that's at least how it's called, of the wheelchair with the ramp, and that would then allow it to glide over the ramp. If we want the wheelchair to be stopped by these walls, say for instance when we bump into it, then we also select this game object here, the walls, the geometry, and give it a mesh collider, and we can do the same with the glass here. Again, give it a mesh collider. So we can always expand and contract these hierarchies here. So maybe the model needs to be moved a little bit further away from the wheelchair, but that should be fine. All right. Just something simple. You can also create a sphere here if you want, or reset its position in the inspector, and maybe scale it down to 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, and then move it up 0.2, so it's on the floor. Should be in the floor, slightly above. It already has a collider, and there, for instance, you can, and that's just maybe something you want to explore for kids, you can give it a component that's called rigid body. That's not necessary, but you can then try what happens when you bump into that sphere with the wheelchair. All right, so all set actually for the simulation. So make sure that the geometry you ride on is on the layer floor, has a mesh collider, and all the other individual geometries where you want to have collision detection have a mesh collider as well. They don't need to be on the layer floor, which would throw off the simulation. So just here, this plane is on the layer floor, so we can write on that plane, and this ramp geometry. So next step is go to File, Build Settings, Player Settings, and then we can give our company a name. Or we should change this from something that was default to something that makes sense. I give this the name Caviasim under product name. All else is set, doesn't need to be changed. So you can close this. Then up here there is scenes in build, and there are scenes in this Unity project you can build. Building means compiling this to become an application that you can run on, say for instance, a VR headset. And here we must tell Unity that we want to build the scene we actually want to build. So in my case, that would be the MG scene. So we uncheck all these scenes we don't need, add the open scenes. And before we proceed, we must save this scene, File, Build Settings. So now the scene is saved. Android here is selected. And then we can hit down here, Build, and go to a folder where we want to save the APK we are creating, and Unity will then begin compiling this into a playable application. And when this build has completed, which Unity reports down below, where it says build completed with the result of succeeded, you should also see in the folder where you created the build this APK file, which you can then install to your headset using SideQuest and then run the simulation.